My name's Daniel. This happened during my sophomore year of high school, back in 2019. Our school had this tradition called a lock-in. It was basically an overnight charity event where students slept in the gym, played games, and raised money for a cause. It always sounded like fun when older kids talked about it, so when it came around that year, I signed up immediately. About 30 of us registered, including my best friend Tyler. We'd brought our sleeping bags, snacks, and all the stuff we thought we'd need to stay awake. The first few hours were fun. Dodgeball, pizza, loud music echoing off the gym walls. Teachers and a few parent volunteers were chaperoning, but they mostly hung out in a side room with coffee, leaving us to ourselves. By around 1:30 a.m., the energy started to die down. The lights were dimmed, people started unrolling their sleeping bags, and the noise turned into whispers. It felt like a giant slumber party. I remember lying there staring at the rafters, thinking how weird it was to be in the gym at night. The place that usually smelled like sweat and floor polish now felt colder, emptier. But I couldn't sleep. No matter how many times I closed my eyes, my mind wouldn't settle. So around 2 a.m., I decided to get up and go to the bathroom down the hall. That was my first mistake. The second I stepped out of the gym doors, it was like entering a completely different world. The hallway was pitch black except for the faint glow of exit signs. Every step I took echoed off the lockers like someone was following me. You know that feeling when a place you're familiar with suddenly feels hostile? That's what it was like. I kept telling myself, it's just a school, nothing weird. I went into the bathroom, flipped on the light, and for a moment I felt safe again. I splashed some water on my face, stared at myself in the mirror, and tried to calm down. The clock on my phone said 2:06 a.m. When I stepped back into the hallway, I noticed something off right away. The double doors to the gym, the ones we'd shut earlier, were wide open. I knew they'd been closed. Everyone had been told to keep them closed so no one would wander out. At first I thought maybe one of the teachers had gone in or out, but the hall was completely silent. Not a single voice, not a footstep, just that heavy, stale nighttime air. I walked slowly toward the gym. My heart started beating faster with each step. It's nothing, I kept whispering to myself. It's nothing. I reached the doorway, peered in, and froze. On the far side of the gym, near the bleachers, stood a man. He wasn't a student. He wasn't one of the parents or teachers either. He looked older, maybe mid-30s. Wearing dark clothes that blended into the shadows. And he wasn't moving. He was just standing there, perfectly still, staring at the rows of sleeping kids. For a second, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. My first thought was, oh, maybe that's a janitor. But he wasn't holding anything. No cart, no mop. Just empty hands hanging at his sides. And then I realized he hadn't seen me yet. I felt my stomach drop. The air felt thick, heavy, like I couldn't breathe. My hands started shaking. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked up. Very slowly, I took a step back. The floor squeaked under my shoe, and I froze again, praying he hadn't heard. He still didn't move, just stared. I backed up another step, and another, until I was out of sight of the doorway. Then I turned and bolted down the hall as quietly as I could, my heart slamming against my ribs so hard it hurt. I reached the chaperone's room, slammed the door behind me, and whispered as fast as I could, "There's someone in the gym!" One of the teachers looked at me confused. "What? What are you talking about?" "There's a man. He's in the gym. He's just standing there." Two teachers got up immediately and followed me back down the hall. My legs felt like jelly. I stayed behind them, peeking out from the corner as they pushed open the gym doors. Empty. The man was gone. The sleeping bags were exactly as we'd left them. Everyone still asleep, undisturbed. It almost felt like I'd imagined the whole thing. But then one of the teachers pointed at the door. "Who left this open?" she muttered. On the floor, wedging the door open, was a rock. Someone had deliberately propped it open from the inside. Later that morning, after the event ended, the school security team checked the cameras. They saw him. A tall man in dark clothes slipping in through a side exit that had been left unlocked. He'd walked the hallways for almost 20 minutes before appearing in the gym. And then, as soon as I ran to the chaperones, he vanished back out the same door, They never found him. The police were called, and for weeks afterward, our school was on edge. Teachers double-checked every door at night. We weren't allowed to do overnight events anymore. To this day, I still replay that night in my head. What was he planning? Why was he just standing there? And most of all, what would have happened if I hadn't gone to the bathroom at that exact moment? Sometimes I lie awake at night thinking about it. 30 kids, fast asleep in their sleeping bags. A stranger in the corner of the gym, and only me awake to see him.
I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, and my middle school was the type of place that already felt unsettling, even on the brightest, sunniest day. The building was old, over 70 years old, and everything about it reminded you of that fact. The floors creaked when you walked on them, no matter how carefully you stepped. The fluorescent lights in the hallways buzzed and flickered, like they were fighting to stay alive. And the paint along the walls peeled in long, curling strips, revealing layers of different colors underneath, decades of attempts to hide how ancient the place really was. Kids at school always swapped ghost stories, and most of them centered around one specific thing: the basement door. It was tucked away at the very end of the science wing, half hidden in a little alcove no one really had reason to walk down unless they were heading to the boiler room. It was made of old, heavy wood, with a metal handle that had gone dull with rust. A thick padlock had been clamped across it for as long as anyone could remember. Teachers always brushed it off, saying, "Oh, it's just storage down there. Nothing to worry about." But kids being kids, we didn't believe it. Some said a janitor had died down there years ago. Others said it connected to underground tunnels that led to the high school across town. The most popular rumor, though, was that the basement wasn't locked to keep us out. It was locked to keep something in. Most of the time, I didn't think too much about it. But one night during my 8th grade year, I had detention. It wasn't for anything exciting, just being late too many times. But that day, detention changed the way I looked at that school forever. I remember the room felt colder than usual. When it finally ended, the sky outside the windows had already gone dim, bleeding from gold into gray. By the time I walked out of the classroom, the halls were silent. No footsteps, no chatter. Just the dull hum of the overhead lights. The school feels like a different world when it's empty. Every sound echoes too loud. Every shadow stretches too long. I remember clutching my backpack straps tighter as I walked toward the main exit. That's when I heard it. At first, it was faint. A hollow, rhythmic sound. Knock, knock, knock. I stopped walking. The sound had come from behind me, from the science wing. I turned and squinted down the hall. The far end was swallowed in shadow. I told myself it was probably nothing, just a janitor finishing up his work. But for some reason, my legs carried me down that hallway instead of out of the building. Each step felt heavier than the last. When I reached the end, my heart dropped. The sound was definitely coming from the basement door. I stood there frozen, listening, and that's when I realized it wasn't knocking anymore. It was scratching, long, slow drags like fingernails scraping against wood. The sound made my skin crawl. It was deliberate, not random. Whoever, or whatever, was behind that door wanted me to hear it. I took one small step closer. My ears were straining for any other sound. Breathing, movement, but all I heard was that steady scratching. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence was so sharp it was almost painful. I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears. I exhaled shakily and tried to laugh it off in my head. Pipes. It has to be pipes. Or maybe mice. Or rats. That's all. I turned to leave. But the moment my foot hit the floor, the door handle rattled violently. It wasn't a subtle jiggle. It was a furious, twisting shake, like someone on the other side was trying to rip the handle off. I froze in place, too terrified to breathe. It went on for what felt like forever, metal grinding against metal, the wood frame shuddering under the pressure. And then it stopped. The silence afterward was worse than the noise. That broke me. I bolted. My sneakers slammed against the tile as I sprinted down the hall, not daring to look back. I don't even remember pushing the exit doors open. All I know is the cold air outside hit me like a wave, and I didn't stop running until I was halfway down the street. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that door handle rattling, imagined it bursting open and something crawling out. The next morning, I told one of my teachers what had happened. She gave me a tight smile and said, "Oh, I'm sure it was just the pipes. Old buildings make all kinds of noises." But she didn't look me in the eye when she said it. Later that week, one of the janitors pulled me aside. He was an older guy, quiet most of the time, but he'd overheard me talking about the basement with some friends. He looked around like he was making sure no one else was listening. Then he said, "That door hasn't been opened in years. They sealed the basement off after they found a man living down there." I remember my stomach dropping. He told me years ago, before I even started at that school, staff had discovered a homeless man had been sneaking into the basement at night. He'd set up a sort of camp down there. Blankets, food wrappers, even candles. Nobody knew how long he'd been there. But here's the part that still makes my skin crawl. The janitor leaned closer and whispered, "When they found him, he didn't want to leave. He fought them. And when they finally dragged him out, he kept saying, 'You can't lock it in. You can't lock it in.'" The school never gave us students an explanation. The door stayed locked. Rumors swirled, but nothing was ever confirmed. And me? I can still hear that scratching in my head. I don't know if it was just my imagination. I don't know if someone or something really was behind that basement door. But every time I think about it, one question eats at me. If the man they dragged out years ago said, "You can't lock it in," then what exactly did they leave down there? This happened during my senior year of high school. It was fall, right around October, which meant the days were getting shorter, and by the time last period rolled around, the hallways were already tinted in that eerie golden light that made the whole building feel a little off. Our history teacher had been out sick for almost a week, and that day we were told we'd have a substitute. Nobody really thought much of it. Sub days were usually easy. You watch a movie, do some worksheets, and try not to fall asleep. But the second this man walked into the room, I knew something was different. He wasn't like the usual substitutes. No clipboard, no smile, no, "Hello, class." He just strolled in carrying nothing but a single binder tucked under his arm. He didn't even tell us his name. Usually subs write it on the board, but he just stood there for a moment, staring at us, like he was taking in the entire room. And it wasn't the casual kind of glance. It was a slow, deliberate scan, where his eyes lingered on each person for just a second too long. Everyone got quiet, waiting for him to say something. Finally, he opened the binder, flipped a page, and started calling roll. But even that felt wrong. He'd pause on each name as though he was committing it to memory. Like when he got to mine, he said it slowly, repeating my last name under his breath before moving on. It sent a weird chill down my spine. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just awkward, maybe nervous. But then he started asking questions. And not normal questions like, "Did your teacher leave instructions?" or "Who's the class clown?" No. He asked us things like, "Do you live nearby?" and "How far is your walk home?" One kid laughed and said, "Why? You gonna drive me?" Trying to make a joke, but the substitute didn't laugh. He just smiled faintly and moved on to the next student. He asked another girl if her parents were usually home after school. Then he turned to the kid behind me and asked what his dad did for work. We all kind of laughed awkwardly, assuming it was his attempt at small talk. But it wasn't funny. There was something about the way he leaned forward, hanging on to every answer, like it was important. The room felt tense, but nobody wanted to be the one to call it out. We were seniors. We thought we could handle a weird sub. But then, things got worse. Halfway through class, a girl near the back, her name was Sarah, raised her hand and asked if she could go to the bathroom. The substitute didn't say yes right away. He just looked at her for a long moment, then finally nodded. She left the room. 10 minutes passed, then 15. She didn't come back. Usually a teacher would at least notice or say something, but this man just kept teaching. Or pretending to. He wasn't even covering the material. He just flipped through random pages in the history book, reading lines here and there, his eyes constantly drifting back to the door. Eventually, another student whispered, "Should someone go check on her?" We were all looking around nervously, waiting for someone else to make the first move. Finally, one of Sarah's friends stood up and quietly slipped out into the hallway. When she came back a few minutes later, her face was pale, her eyes wide. She didn't sit down right away. Instead, she leaned over to another student and whispered something. That student's eyes widened, and soon the whole room was buzzing with quiet panic. The substitute didn't ask what was going on. He just stood there at the front, smiling faintly, like he already knew.
Can you step outside with me?
The second the door closed, everyone started whispering at once. "What's going on? What did she see?" Sarah's friend finally said it out loud. She said he followed her. He followed her down the hallway. Apparently, when Sarah left for the bathroom, the sub waited a few minutes, then left too. She noticed him trailing behind her. He didn't say anything at first, just followed her into the empty hallway. Then he told her to stop. He said he needed her help carrying some supplies from his car. She said no, but he kept insisting. He got closer, asking her to just come outside for a minute. That's when she ran. She didn't even go to the bathroom. She sprinted straight to the main office, shaking and out of breath. The office staff immediately contacted the principal, and that's why the assistant principal came storming into our room. Later, we learned the truth. He wasn't even a real substitute. The school had never hired him. He had faked documents, used a forged ID, and somehow gotten assigned to our class. Nobody knew how long he'd been planning it or what he wanted, but security footage confirmed it. He hadn't been carrying supplies. His car was parked right at the edge of the lot. Inside the trunk, they found duct tape, zip ties, and a tarp. When I heard that, my stomach dropped. I couldn't stop replaying the day in my head. The way he looked at us, the way he paused on our names, asking about our homes, our families. He wasn't just being weird, he was choosing, and I'll never forget the last look he gave us before leaving with the assistant principal. He turned back for just a second, his eyes scanning the room one final time. Not like a teacher checking attendance, but like a predator making sure he remembered his prey. That night, I couldn't sleep. None of us could. Sarah never came back to that class for the rest of the semester, and honestly, I don't blame her. Every time I walked into that history room afterward, I could still feel his presence, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. Sometimes I think about how close it was, how easily it could have been me or Sarah or anyone else in that room, and it still makes my skin crawl.